That jive-ass turkey better have my motherfucking butter. Every time you see me, I got Adidas on. But I still can check a bitch, so better watch your tone. I'm the original Brody, I'm the Tyrone they clone. Feeling tempted to roll it up and get in my zone. Rhythmic tones, frequencies hitting pyramid domes. Can lift up only through sound, and that's the shit that I'm on. Cryptic and shit in my prose, as I'm dignitizing a pro. A snake charmer, I'm told. But mine is errands, run some errands, ho go iron some clothes. Think it's a parent who's the parent, and I shine in my role. It's oddy dotty, lottie dotty, I'm a party on my own. Top a hottie and she's acting naughty, she's up in the zone. I'm off some shotties and I'm talking potty, trying to get it done. If this was 1973, I would've put you on a stroll. In 1993, I would have you on the pole. But we've evolved, I like women with degrees and some goals. Getting Z's at a decent hour when she make it home. No disease, keep that pussy clean, take care of them toes. She getting money, so all this shit she can do it on her own. Hit the gym, take your medicine, do your yoga poses. Here's a way that you can eat to feel full and fit them clothes. Call me late so we can pray and search the scriptures to be whole. I'm a fiction in your life that's hard to replace when I'm gone. So weigh your words before you end up sitting waiting at the phone. Yeah, I'm patient, but the way I am, I'm living by a code. Let her know that dick ain't free, it costs a fee to get infold. Yeah, I need something to hold. What's the story you compose? I'ma flip it. Don't you sell that pussy, let's go open up a business. Think I'm kidding, most are amazed at degrees in which I'm bold. But bitch, gotta be patient, be honest, do what you told. I see the innocence within the darkness in your soul, and with privilege present you with the way that you can mold to our benefit, cause best believe not only for your own. I ain't limited by they doctrines on the ways that things should go. I would rather just be honest with the way that I propose. But when I touch your soul, everything I say is gold. Can't wipe if she ain't solid, if you got somewhere to go. Can't be rocking with a mold. Gotta know it's your role. Does she surrender and follow you even if she doesn't know? Is she swallowing the seed that you were dropping in a dome? Are you watering and anchoring that shit with every O? Classic conditions and thinking of ways to make the ship rose without contradicting the principles and ways that you've shown. Does she appreciate rewards you give for when she's hitting goals? Does she know and can articulate the program in our role? Does she eagerly anticipate the feeling of the pole? Does she turn into a little girl around you like she's home? Adi Dottie got some game for you to take it to the hole. Coach Brody is the name, you gotta pay me.
Was your ex really a narcissist, right? This is a word that gets thrown around so much these days, and that shit's kind of crazy to me. I'm gonna be honest with you, right? But my personal belief is that every single person has certain narcissistic traits and attributes, right? Because the ego is simply a social survival instinct. This is my theory. Maybe other people may also believe this, but I never heard anyone say it before I said it, right? The ego is a social survival instinct. You know, when I think of the nature of love, I think about God, right? But when you look at God, God is not a physical being. Because he's not a physical being, he doesn't have any physical needs. It also says that if it's a situation where if people don't cry out to God, the grass and the trees will cry out to God, right? So God is going to receive his praise and his validation regardless. He isn't fixated on one particular person. If anybody's poly in the world, it's God, right? Because he can get worship from anybody. Billions of people across the planet. So one thing to understand is we have to look at things from a perspective of, yes, there's this concept of quote unquote unconditional love and grace that we can share with people. But this does not mean that intrinsic desire equals unlimited resources. We do not have an unlimited amount of energy to pour out to other people without being reciprocated, without people pouring back into us. I understand that when you are in a relationship, when you are connected with an individual, a lot of things are going to operate somewhat on a foundation of dom-sub dynamics and masculine-feminine dynamics. And that's why I bring up the sexual polarity quadrant. And there's a topic that I want to bring up to you called core polarity, right? Core polarity. Within the sexual polarity quadrant, there are 4 different aspects of the quadrant, right? But there are 4 different cup spaces, right? And the 4 different aspects of the quadrant are masculine, feminine, dominant, and submissive, right? Now, understand that the cup space that you're in is oftentimes going to be dynamic and not static, right? Dynamic, not static. And in the same way, your attraction to your partner and their attraction to you is typically going to be what? Dynamic, not static. What does this mean? This means that in a high cup space, right? Let me go through the 4 different aspects of the quadrant, meaning masculine, feminine, dominant, submissive. If you're primarily masculine, then in a high cup space, you're going to be masculine, dominant. In a low cup space, you're going to be masculine, submissive, right? If you're primarily dominant, in a high cup space, you're going to be masculine, dominant. In a low cup space, you're going to be feminine, dominant. If you are primarily submissive, in a high cup space, you're going to be feminine, submissive. In the low cup space, you're going to be masculine, submissive. If you're primarily feminine, in a high cup space, you're going to be feminine, submissive. And in a low cup space, you're going to be feminine, dominant, right? And every single cup space has the same kind of baseline of what people call being nice, right? Which is the masculine, submissive exercise and self-control. Very important to understand, right? So when we want to gauge if your partner is truly a narcissist, here are some things that we want to really cover in this conversation, right? Does your partner, or has your partner, ever directly expressed to you what their needs and desires are, what they need to fill their cup, right? 2, do they ever pour into you? 3, does pouring into you lead to a positive feedback loop, right? That's a very important one to cover right there, because all of this is about sustainable cycles of energy and positive feedback loops, right? So if the only way your partner's needs can be met with you on a consistent or semi-consistent basis is through manipulating you, through putting pressure on you, through getting angry with you, through pulling away, through gaslighting you, then understand that this is going to be an individual who, if you lack the capacity to take accountability, to make changes, and to correct the way you're looking at and viewing your relationship dynamic, you will play the victim through your own covert narcissism and come to the conclusion that this individual is a narcissist. Right? See, there's a difference in between how a masculine submissive exercise and self-control works when a relationship is only on a social level, right? When you're only interacting with an individual on one level, right? But once a relationship becomes more integrated with multiple aspects of interaction, this is where a person does need a return on their investment. Don't look at this as something that's negative. Don't look at it as, oh, their love is conditional, because guess what? So is yours. Even if it's not the love itself that's conditional, the access to that validation is conditional. Very important to understand. So let me go through some of these different narcissistic traits and give some explanations and some examples about how these things can work and how they can be instances where they are healthy versus unhealthy, right? Or different ways of looking at them, right? Because everything is about perspective. So let's say we're talking about the concept of stonewalling, right? Now understand this. Let's say we're talking about a woman in a relationship dynamic and she's getting stonewalled. What is this? This is when a man shuts down and he cuts off communication. Now, one thing to understand about being stonewalled is this, right? Has this person already communicated to you what their triggers are? Is this person legitimately shutting down because you've siphoned too much of their energy? Are you stretching them too far when it comes to the capacity of things that are hurtful to them that you are doing? If this is the case, then you are being covertly narcissistic with them, and you feel entitled towards communication. You feel entitled towards them understanding you, even though you're choosing not to understand them. Here's an example, right? Let's say an individual has been willing to communicate with you and to compromise. Let's say you didn't appreciate the compromise. Now they want to do things their way. It's your turn to compromise with them in their eyes. Now, if said individual has already communicated to you what they want, and they've already communicated to you what they need and what they desire, and they've observed that the more they're willing to communicate with you, the less willing you are to actually compromise or to make forward moving steps towards them. Right? You've trained a feedback loop in their mind, in their ego, that says that you do not appreciate communication, you do not appreciate compromise, and therefore they have nothing left to say to you. Now, if in instances of them shutting down, your ego gets triggered, and from that place of your ego getting triggered, you chase after them, then guess what? Guess what happens then? You have effectively established and trained a partner that the way to get their needs met is by them shutting down on you. Now, something to understand is that the reason people play games is so that they can get what they want while they still want it. Now, understand this concept, right? Understand this. You know, it's like when we talk about the law of attraction, right? It's like when we talk about the concept of neediness and desperation, pushing away what you desire. People oftentimes will find themselves in a position where as long as they want what they want, they don't receive it. But once they get into a place of abundance in their mindset, right? Once they get to a place of no longer wanting what it is that they asked for, that it comes towards them. So why would an individual do this as a logical or a purposeful strategy rather than just walking away? Let's ask this question. The reason why is because by the time they're ready to walk away, they no longer can take the value of validation out of receiving what they want that strokes their ego. So what an individual may do is once they recognize this pattern in interacting with you, that they don't get what they want as long as they want it, they will pretend not to want what they want as a strategy to get their needs met while it's still a need. Right? Let me give another example. Let's say we're talking about the concept of gaslighting. Right? And what is this? This is when an individual says you're crazy, or an individual attempts to get you to look at things from a different point of view, which is to empathize with them, to understand them, to see things from their point of view. And they'll do this by causing you to question your perception of reality. One thing to think real quick is your perception of reality actually accurate? I'm one of those people who doesn't gaslight people for their insecurities, because oftentimes there's truth behind people's insecurities. But at the same time, I look at it and say not everybody's feelings in every single instance are 100% valid or 100% logical. Right? So let me give you this example. Let's say that at one point in time, the way that you feel about an individual leads to you being receptive to giving them what they want. And that if you split, right, which is typically a trait of narcissism, right, which is typically a trait of borderline personality disorder, splitting, right, which can also be a trait of sociopathy. See, splitting is a defense mechanism that comes from childhood, where when you're a baby, your parent is either fully good or fully bad. and you lack nuance in the way that you perceive them and the way you interpret them. So when you're a baby, if your needs are met, you're happy. But if your needs aren't met, now you're mad. And now your parent is the biggest villain in the entire universe. Right? This is a childhood wound. So when it comes to the concept of splitting, right? And this is oftentimes where valuing and devaluation takes place. If you have a lack of an ability to see things from an integrated perspective, to choose to see your partner from a positive point of view, right? To know and to communicate what will cause you to see them in a positive light versus a negative light, and then to treat them in a way in which they will desire to treat you in a way where you continue to see them in a positive light, then you are simply attempting to manipulate a person through your own emotions, right? So for a woman, oftentimes it's going to be the animus. For a man, oftentimes it's going to be the anima, right? The father complex, the mother complex. So when we're talking about the concept of gaslighting, let's look at it like this. Here's a great example. If on one day you see your partner as beautiful, as sexually appealing, as intelligent, as wise, as respectable, and this is something that strokes their ego, right? And then on another day, you're in a state of mind where you do not respect them, you do not desire them, you are not attracted to them, especially if they're just simply communicating with you directly about what they want and what they need. Then guess what? They aren't really gaslighting you. And it sounds like I'm gaslighting to say this, right? What's really going on is they are choosing the relationship. Why are they choosing the relationship? Because if what you're communicating that you want and what you need in that moment, or how you view things and expressing your emotions and wanting them to be validated, is that you want your partner to view your point of view as valid, when the point of view that you have is one that, if the momentum of this is carried forward, would lead to the breaking of that relationship, would lead to the sabotaging of that relationship. Then guess what? Them convincing you or trying to articulate to you how to look at things is not them actually gaslighting you. It feels like gaslighting because when you get into your social programming, or when you get into a certain state of mind, you don't want to view things from their point of view, but you want them to view things from your point of view. See, that is entitled, right? Wanting someone to see something from your point of view, but not wanting to see things from their point of view, that's entitlement. Because understand, choosing to choose the relationship, choosing to look at the relationship from a positive angle, from a positive point of view, in which you're able to see your partner in the best light. That takes energy. Being able to take things that your partner says that your ego would take as negative, and then to choose to see this as something that's neutral or positive, it takes energy to reinterpret this type of communication, right? And it also takes energy for them to reinterpret the negative things they may feel towards you, and to choose to communicate with you in a way that you can understand, right? If you expect this to be a one-sided thing, you are entitled. And there's a lot of covert narcissism, a lack of self and situational awareness within this, right? Let me give you another example. Let's say we're talking about the concept of emotional blackmail, right? Emotional blackmail. And this goes in line with this last example I was given, right? Because if we're speaking about the concept of emotional blackmail, sometimes an individual has already given all they felt they could give, or all they felt that the effort you were giving was worth, right? And from this point of view, an individual may be at the point where they're about ready to walk away from you. So let's say you do something that's hurtful to them, And it takes a lot of energy for them to reinterpret the things that you did and or said, or the attitudes and the energies that you've displayed towards them. Sometimes in these instances, an individual choosing to directly communicate to you what they would need in order to feel as if the energy is balanced is not them emotionally blackmailing you. It's them setting their standards. It's them setting their boundaries. It's them setting an understanding of saying what they would need in order to be willing to keep doing what they're doing, as far as choosing to interpret the things that you do and say in a way that doesn't indicate that you want to leave. Right? So if you don't communicate yourself that you want to leave, and you don't stand on that, you're not consistent with that, you don't truly cut contact or cut ties, right? Then from one point of view, they can view it as you're having a low cup day. Like I said, we're talking about cup theory, right? We're talking about core polarity, right? Masculine energy stifles submissiveness, feminine energy corrupts dominance. So understand, an individual can be a dominant core polarity individual, right? And within modern psychology, oftentimes dominance and submissiveness is viewed from a negative point of view, right? Both of them. As in, relationships should always just be equal. But understand that once sex is involved, most of the time, relationships are not going to be equal. And that's fine. You can be equal in inherent value, but that doesn't mean you're equal in roles. A ship doesn't have two captains. It can have a captain and a co-captain, right? But a ship doesn't have two captains. A plane doesn't have two pilots. You may have a pilot and a co-pilot, but a plane does not have two pilots. Do you know and accept your role? Let's say we're talking about the concept of negging. This is a good one, right? When we're talking about negging, when we're talking about tearing someone down as far as their worth and their value. Let's say you're in a relationship with an individual, right? And you are in an insecure place in your life. And this person was patient with your insecurities and was there to lift you up. Now, let's say that as they lift you up and they validate you, you begin to treat them as if you are better than them. Your attitude and your energy towards them displays that you feel as if you are worth more than they are, right? And that you no longer should be giving and reciprocating and adding value to that relationship. Sometimes the concept of negging is simply an individual bringing you back to earth, right? Because anytime you're judging somebody on a base of value, that's external value. Anytime you're judging an individual on a foundation of comparative value, you subject yourself to the same standards of comparative value. So sometimes that entitlement is that when you judge an individual based off of comparative value, while wanting to see yourself from a place of inherent value, you are now in a position of being pretty damn narcissistic, right? So sometimes negging, or what people may consider emotional abuse, is an individual trying to bring you back down to earth because you are beginning to view yourself in a very entitled manner and attempting to lower the value of your partner in order to bolster the value of yourself, right? Understand that just because you are not using derogatory language, or just because you're not raising your voice, or just because you're not hitting your partner, doesn't mean that you aren't doing and or saying things that trigger their wounds and insecurities, right? Now, you can say that an individual is responsible for their own wounds and insecurities, but if you have your own wounds and insecurities that you haven't worked through, then this is hypocritical. This is the truth of the matter, right? This is the truth. People have their own coping mechanisms. People have their own triggers. People have their own things that they deal with. Now, in order to be in a relationship, right, you need to gauge whether or not you respect this individual enough to stay off of their wounds, their childhood wounds, their triggers, and to respect that, to show compassion towards that, to show empathy towards that. When you have no empathy towards your partner's childhood wounds and triggers, unless they trigger your childhood wounds and triggers, then you are operating from a space of covert narcissism. This is why I believe codependency and narcissism are two sides of the same coin. Because if the only way that your partner can get you to respect their boundaries is by disrespecting your boundaries, then you are creating the environment in which you deal with the emotional and or verbal abuse that you accuse them of. Very important to understand. Right? Very important to understand. Relationships aren't going to be perfect all the time. But if you have a grass is greener on the other side mentality, right? If this is the mentality that you have, then oftentimes you're doing this at the detriment of your partner's self-esteem. Right? Yes, their self-esteem is the esteem of their motherfucking self. And because it's the esteem of their motherfucking self, guess what? They are responsible for that. But guess what? This mentality is based off of a false premise that the grass isn't greener where you water it. So when you believe and think in this particular manner, you are really devaluing and damaging your partner in order to boost your own self-esteem. And oftentimes, if you have this delusional, entitled type of thinking, whatever grass you think is greener, in due time it's not going to be greener. Because people oftentimes are going to present themselves up front as a representative. So if you fall for and get into limerence with the representative of an individual, not understanding that this person may have some of the same triggers that your partner does, you may not understand the law of momentum. When you meet somebody new, their ego, and just like everyone else's ego, is going to work off of return on investment. Your partner is typically going to be much more invested than a new person that you meet. Right? So they're going to be much more easily triggered by you doing things that show a devaluation of them than somebody new, especially somebody who already has other partners who they are more emotionally invested in, who can trigger them in the same exact ways. And you don't even know if this person is going to handle things in the same manner. So when we get into the conversation of core polarity versus fixed polarity, and especially the conversation of core polarity, if your partner's core polarity is dominant, then when their cup gets low, they're going to move into feminine dominant. But before they get to feminine dominant, they're going to the masculine submissive exercise and self-control. In order to have a healthy relationship, you want to be in polarity, right? Which is a polarity between the masculine, feminine, and dom subdynamics, right? But this isn't going to be 100% consistent for almost anybody. So that means that once one person drops down into a masculine submissive exercise and self-control, it's both parties' responsibility to do the work to get back to a place of polarity. But if you feel entitled towards them doing this masculine submissive exercise and self-control, and view this only as a description or an instance of you being so intrinsically desirable, and you don't respect or desire your own partner, then this entitlement is going to lead to you expecting more than you're actually putting in and expecting more than you're worth. Right? Let me look up some more narcissistic traits and narcissistic qualities, or narcissistic coping mechanisms and strategies. So lack of empathy, right? That's one of them. Sense of entitlement, grandiose feelings. If you lack self-awareness and situational awareness when it comes to how you handle your relationship, you may conclude that your partner is narcissistic when you may just be a covertly narcissistic individual. Requiring excessive admiration, right? When you're accusing someone of stonewalling you, right? Oftentimes, you're not listening to understand them, and you're getting into the fundamental attribution error, and you expect them to continue to communicate with you when they've already communicated to you what they want and they need, and you want to pretty much gaslight them, override their boundaries, override their standards, and get them to continue to give to you when you're not reciprocating. It's exploitative, right? And what does this also oftentimes come from? A high sensitivity to criticism, right? So understand that when it comes to these type of relationship dynamics, you got to have self and situational awareness. You have to know what's going on, right? You have to think about the logic of the situation. I know that's hard sometimes for some people to look at the logic of the situation. But think about how much effort your partner's put it in. And effort isn't always money. Effort isn't always a relationship title. Sometimes effort is how much energy they have to put in towards reinterpreting the things you say. This takes energy. This pours energy out of their cup. If an individual is emotionally invested in you enough, right? And they put in this energy and this drains their cup, then eventually they're going to go from a place of directly communicating their needs to covertly doing it, a masculine submissive exercise and self-control to bypass your psychological reactants. And once this becomes ineffective, they're either going to leave or they're going to begin to manipulate you because they perceive you as attempting to manipulate them. Polarity will always balance itself out. And it's easier for someone to drop down a cup space than to go up one. Let me see if I can find some more of those narcissistic strategies, right? Blame shifting, that's one. I talked about that some. Let's see. Here's another one, right? Threats and intimidation. Now check this out, right? Let's say you are betraying your partner. Let's say that you are mishandling them. You're misusing them. You lack self and situational awareness. They have self and situational awareness. They are warning you. Listen, this is how I feel about this particular behavior that you're exhibiting. This is how I feel about it. This is how this makes me feel. I'm patient with it right now. But in due time, I'm no longer going to be patient with it. I know how I would react and respond to this situation if you exhibit these qualities. I'm not going to allow you to sit here and take advantage of me. Therefore, if you continue this behavior, then this is what's going to take place. Is this meant as threats and intimidation? No, this is communicating that a person has the self and situational awareness to know how they will respond to a situation and giving you the opportunity to make decisions that will avoid these repercussions, right? Because if you believe that you are going to just be, you're supposed to be unconditionally loved, right? And unconditionally heard and understood and accepted no matter what. Not recognizing that this takes energy from your partner because you're not always handling and carrying yourself in a way that's intrinsically lovable or desirable or respectable. You're entitled. You feel entitled. If a person has the self-awareness to explain these things to you, then you should probably respect that and understand where they're coming from. Right? Withholding, right? We're talking about withholding. What does your partner need in order for them to feel good? Right? What do they need to feel validated? Right? Something we need to understand about relationships oftentimes is this. People oftentimes are going to place a different value on sex versus communication because of sex negativity, right? Because of different levels of sex negativity, there's oftentimes going to be a different value placed on these things. And this is why men are going to be oftentimes more so seen as narcissists than women, even though women can be just as narcissistic. I remember I had an ex one time, right? We were having a conversation. And in this conversation that we had, she would say what she would like to do is to meet a man, to present herself as the full package, right? Which on a certain level is love bombing. And then from that space, she would want to present herself as the full package, to communicate with the man, which would be receiving validation for herself, to boost her self-esteem, which is narcissistic, it's predatory. And then to do this until a man was in a position where he wanted to have sex with her, and then to make her exit after the man desired to be reciprocated sexually. Right? Now, everybody typically loves sex. Typically, everybody loves communication. Typically, everybody loves being understood. Everybody loves feeling validated. But the male and the female dominant egos are typically going to be switched, right? So there's a dominant and a submissive sexual ego, and there's a dominant and there's a submissive non-sexual ego, right? But the dominant and the submissive overall egos for men and women are typically different. A woman's dominant ego is typically going to be based around the concept of feeling innocent, right? Of feeling heard and understood, of feeling a lack of pressure, right? Of feeling harmless, of feeling virtuous, and of feeling attractive and desirable, right? You know, a man's dominant ego is typically going to be based off of feeling respected, feeling as if he's in a position of power and control, feeling as if he has sexual prowess, and feeling as if he is desired on a sexual level. And because of this, we have to understand the differences here, right? We have to understand the differences. So what are the differences in these instances? If we're looking at toxic masculinity and toxic femininity, these things work different. They work different. And I don't even assign toxic masculinity nor toxic femininity as things that are exclusive to men or women, right? A woman can operate at a toxic masculinity. Like a woman who wants control, so she physically assaults her boyfriend, is toxic masculinity. A woman raping her boyfriend or drugging him, right, to have sex with him, that would be toxic masculinity, right? A woman who's abusive, that's toxic masculinity, right? Something else to understand when it comes to toxic femininity is that this is about, oftentimes it's going to work through smear campaigns. Men can do it too, right? It's oftentimes not going to be as effective, but that's part of how things work, right? Because toxic femininity is really about accruing a mob mentality in individuals to protect your assumed perception of innocence by any means necessary, right? Toxic femininity is a weaponized, assumed perception of being innocent, of being harmless. So perpetual victimhood, which oftentimes is a very big thing when it comes to these narcissistic witch hunts and these big groups of people who want to call themselves empaths and codependents, right? Oftentimes they relish in the idea of being a victim, because through the idea of being a victim, they're able to villainize and alleviate themselves of all of the responsibility and accountability for their own decisions. How did you treat your partner? Right? How did you show up in that relationship? These are very important questions to ask. So one thing I want to challenge you to do, right, is to have a little bit of a perspective shift. Not to view relationships as if they're fully transactional, right? Because I wouldn't say it's all transactional. Like if you're a woman, there's times where your man genuinely does want to talk to you. He truly does want to hear you. He truly does want to understand you. He truly does want to validate you and enjoys that experience. As a man, you know, there are times where your woman truly does desire you sexually, and she truly does desire to be there for you. She truly does respect you, right? These are true things that really occur. This is a real part of life. This is a real part of relationships. But also understand that within a relationship, you're never going to be able to do only 100% of what you want to do 100% of the time. There are compromises, right? There are compromises that are to be made. And before anybody gets on here and says, well, I don't want to do anything I don't want to do when I don't want to do it, you're entitled, right? Because that means that you expect that your partner only wants to do the things that they do for you 100% of the time. You don't feel like paying bills all the time. Probably almost never feel like paying bills, right? And also, let me say this with women as well. How many times in your life have you found yourself in positions where out of your desire for validation, but before or after you've received it, you've been willing to be sexually available with a man, to get fucked on, suck some dick, do different things? Here's another one. How many women in this world have had transactional sex in some type of manner or capacity? Right? Have you ever had sex to get a bill paid? Have you ever had sex? Have you ever started an OnlyFans, right? Have you ever just done it because you wanted attention, right? Think about these things. What is really more valuable? You need to shift your value system from curiosity to realized chemistry. You need to make a shift in your value system from directly impulsive transactional validation and value to something that's going to be more long-term and sustainable. See, when you hold your partner to a standard of them being someone who you don't do anything you don't want to do for, right? But you're willing to be transactional with other people, you are putting your partner in a position of having to prove their love for you through what they're willing to endure, while you are willing to betray yourself and compromise your own wants and needs in order to get a paycheck at your job or to get attention, right? Men, how many times have you taken women out on dates who you didn't even know if you liked their personality, right? Think about these things, right? So I'm gonna break it down for you like this, right? All validation is narcissistic supply. Simple. Feeling as if you're in a position of power and control. A woman feels more in a position of power and control when a man desires to be invested in her emotionally. When a man desires to be invested in her socially. When a man feels a desire to be invested in her financially. A man's typically going to feel more power control when he has access to a woman sexually, right? When the woman is following his instructions and receptive to the things that he tells her, right? When a woman respects him. Now, all people, for the most part, want all these things all across the board. But you have to keep these things in mind. How you choose to look at things is going to affect the way that you perceive them and how you interpret them. If you don't want to do something simply because a person communicated directly to you what they feel about it and what they think about it, you're putting yourself in a scenario where you're setting yourself up to be manipulated by covertly narcissistic individuals, while you may have a person who's not even truly narcissistic in your life, who's simply communicating their needs, right? Also, another thing to keep in mind is this. A person can be patient with things that you're going through. This is true. I'm going to say this about relationships. People can be patient about things that you're dealing with and going through. But the person who's your primary partner in your life, when they're patient about things that you're dealing with and going through, don't pour out this narcissistic supply or this validation to someone else who's less invested than they are before you give to your partner first. Right? That's fucked up. Don't do it. Simple. If you need to take advantage of anyone, take advantage of someone who's not as invested in you. You don't take advantage of somebody who's close to you, right? And sometimes there is a lack of self-awareness with this. And what do I mean by this when I say there can be a lack of self-awareness? Let's say you are in a scenario in which you may use a headache, right? Or you may use, for women, they may use depression or hormonal issues or religion or anything that they deal with in order to evade being sexual with a man who's invested in them. The moment that you recognize that this is something that you can bypass because of how someone makes you feel, understand that just because a man doesn't tell you that there is a sexual price on his time doesn't mean that there's not one. Right? Understand that. The moment you recognize you are able to and have a capacity to go against certain values that you have for an individual, you need to be able to transmute that to your partner, right? As a man, you need to recognize certain things, right? Certain things you need to recognize. Just because you don't feel like talking to your woman right now. I understand that. Maybe she talks too much sometimes. It's understandable. But if you meet some brand new woman, right, and you feel like validating her and giving her time and attention and energy and communicating with her because covertly you want this new narcissistic supply, right, it's fucked up. Make sure you pour into your woman first, man. I'm not even saying you got to be monogamous. I'm not even saying you got to be in an exclusive relationship. All I'm saying is, once you set a reason and want a person to give you a pass for why you're not showing up the way that you should be showing up in a relationship, right? The moment you break those rules for another individual, you have effectively cheated on them and betrayed them, even if it wasn't sexually, right? The moment you set a pass or you accept a pass, you also accept the responsibility of not breaking that pass unless you are cool with sabotaging that relationship. Understand this. And this is going to create a very negative, toxic cycle. So if you have a reason in your mind as to why you can't do this and why you can't do that, right? Then either you break this for your partner, right? And you overcome this and you work around it and you work through that social programming, those thought processes. You communicate what it is, or you make sure that these rules exist across the board. But when you make rules for someone close to you, but break rules for somebody who's not close to you, you are effectively gaslighting your partner through how you're interacting with them. Because you're taking all the excuses that you've given as to why you couldn't show up, that they trusted you for. They trusted you based off of this. Once you betray that trust, you may not be able to get it back. And if you aren't able to get it back, what do you need to do? You need to go above and beyond and love bomb your partner, right? You need to go above and beyond to show that you mean something, as in it's not enough just to apologize. Apologies are not enough, right? Emotionally blackmail yourself. You got to make up for lost time. And if you aren't willing to do that, what you're displaying is that you neither respect nor desire your partner. So only someone who doesn't value themselves will continue to deal with you under those circumstances. Right? And also understand this. And I'm not going to talk for too much longer on this particular video. But Stockholm Syndrome, trauma bonds, they aren't always the worst thing in the world. Unless you become fully healthy yourself to where you no longer get caught in validational loops. And also have the self and situational awareness, and you have the ability to have the mental frameworks to get yourself to a place of desiring to give validation, right? To desire to be in a position to connect with your partner and can think yourself into that place and do it consistently. Or unless your partner is so overwhelmingly healthy that they're on a level of compersion and aren't concerned with the fact that you are giving them the short end of the stick for a period of time, then the only thing that's going to overcome this in scenarios in which you're already in a pre-existing long-term relationship is to tap into the trauma bond, right? To bond over the trauma of experiences, to share the wounds, to share the pain, to embrace it, right? And to come to a place of understanding within that, which means you have to overcome your ego. So like, let's say if a woman cheats on a man, if she's too much in her ego, she's going to desire to feel safe, right? Which is part of her dominant ego, right? She's going to desire to feel innocent and harmless. It was just a mistake, yada, yada, yada. Bullshit. You knew what you was doing, right? You can't then come to your partner and use the same excuses that you previously had when those weren't excuses that you used with someone else. You can't do it. That's gaslighting them. It's trying to treat them like they're stupid. Right? You can't play the victim afterwards neither. So when you recognize you have a higher capacity than you thought you did, then you make up for it. I remember one time, I was in a situation where I had a primary partner, right? And in this primary partnership, I never ate her ass. One time I was dealing with this woman I was very attracted to. And one day, I'd like to eat this woman's ass. She knew what I was doing, right? But before I did this, even if I would have missed the opportunity to sleep with this woman again, I made sure I ate the ass of the woman who I loved first. Right? I remember I'd have times where I might think about going on a date with somebody. Right? But before I'd go out on a date with another woman, I would go out with her first. There may have been times where I might meet a woman and be excited to talk to that woman. But I made a decision. I wasn't going to spend more time on the phone, emotionally, socially, or financially investing in or validating another woman than the woman in my own life. Right? You have to know how to channel your narcissism. You have to know how to channel your dominant ego. All validation is narcissistic supply, right? Love languages, that's narcissistic supply, right? Understand that. Love languages are narcissistic supply. The better we understand this, the better, because many people are delusional. Many people feel entitled. Many people do not understand their role or what's really going on within their relationship dynamics. And because of this really creates this world where people don't know what the fuck's going on, man. So when asking yourself the question of if your partner is a narcissist or not, one of the best ways of looking at and really questioning this is when your partner receives the validation that they desire, do they reciprocate the validation that you desire, right? Also, do they give less the more that you give, right? The more that you give, do they give less? Now, if you went an extended period of time of not giving pretty much at all, right? And then they give a little bit less when you give more. That's one thing, right? But do you quickly get back to the place of beginning to give as well? Because it's really about creating positive feedback loops for the meeting of each other's needs and sustainable cycles of energy, right? Very important to understand. Also, do they and have they communicated their needs to you directly? Right? Because after communicating directly, if a person's too attached to you and they still desire to receive that validation, this is where manipulation will come in. Right? This is where it will come in. If you are heavily psychologically reacting, which may oftentimes take place when it comes to codependency, because that's masculine submissive, right? That's stifled submissiveness, meaning that psychological reactance means that through direct communication, resistance pops up, and resistance causes you to be rebellious, right? It causes you to be reactant to where you feel as if your freedoms are being taken away through an individual communicating to you the way that they want to be loved and the way they want to be treated. It could be sexually, it could be non-sexually, it could be anything. Understand that if an individual is unable to calmly and succinctly communicate to you what they need, and you have the capacity to give that, right? And you choose not to. And then if they get upset, if they shut down, if they pull away, if they gaslight you, if they love bomb you, if utilizing these strategies that are considered narcissistic strategies are what put them in a position to get their needs met by you, you are not a victim. Right? So when we're talking about the sexual polarity quadrant and how it relates to this, it works in this particular manner, right? The masculine dominant or the leadership position should be the individual who is able to receive what it is that they want, right? To reward good behavior, to create cycles of energy with positive feedback loops, to communicate what they need to make themselves competent for the experience of what they need, and then also to hold the line of having standards that go across the board, boundaries that go across the board, so that they are not rewarding someone else with validation who has done less to earn said validation. Right? And this is where polarity comes in. Most people will talk about how what it means to be healthy is unconditional love. No, that's not the case, right? Because masculine submissive exercise to self-control is below polarity. You know, most people, they overly value and they overly idealize someone being integrated. And when you aren't even healthy yourself, you oftentimes are going to set yourself up for people who will future fake. You oftentimes set yourself up to interact with individuals who are not going to be real with you. They're not going to communicate their triggers. They're not going to communicate what they want. They're simply going to be in your presence, and they're going to what? breadcrumb you the same way you breadcrumb your partner. They're going to gaslight you the same way you gaslight your partner. And you're going to get your karma for it. That's how it works. Right? So having a certain foundation of experiencing direct communication with your partner and working that out, it's oftentimes going to be better and healthier than a lot of these understandings about indirect communication and simply feeling safe. It's Coach Brody. I'm out.